Mean guitar? We're back with the best guitar series on YouTube. By now you should already know that we're talking about riffs that make you go. And on this episode, we're gonna switch it up a little bit. And the latest episodes, we've been doing tuning-specific videos, but this time around, we have a decade-specific video. So I'm gonna go through each decade that metal has been around and find the metal riff that is the meanest, but also that represents that decade the most. And today's episode is sponsored by Sweetwater. Shout out to them for providing this little guide right here, the Nano Cortex by Neural DSP, which I'll be using to recreate each specific decade's tone, or at least get as close as possible as I can with it. My affiliate link to the Nano Cortex on sweetwater.com will be in the description down below. So let's not waste any more time and get right into the riffs. And of course we have to start in the 1970s, and probably the only band of this decade, or at least for the most part of it, that could be considered actual heavy metal and not too hard rock adjacent would be Black Sabbath. So to represent this decade, we have Black Sabbath with Into the Void. And when I was starting to make this video, I already knew that I was gonna want to include something from Masters of the Universe, because I think that's their most doom metal sounding album. I guess you can call this album proto-doom. And to make the tones for this video, I've been using the Cortex Cloud app on my phone because I think it's significantly easier to do with rather than guessing which amps I'm choosing on the Cortex unit. But yeah, check this out. Moving on to the 80s, hold up, let me change the preset. I of course had to go with a thrash metal band because I think it was the most significant and important development of the 80s, which I think was when metal really started to get actually heavy. And of course there's a plethora of bands that I could have chosen for this decade. Was not gonna choose Metallica. Slayer was a good option, Testament, Dark Angel, but in the end I chose to go with one of the greatest projects ever developed in the 80s. It's S.O.D. with March of the S.O.D. One of the simplest, dumbest intro riffs ever, but also one of the most iconic and coolest, and I just had to go with it. It just has so much attitude, it grooves, it's really heavy, it's impossible not to headbang to it. Now for the 90s, the absolute most important development of this decade was the rise of death metal. You all already know how much I love death metal, so I always have to include at least one death metal band in every video. So I went with probably the most obvious option, but it still is a undeniable one. It's Cannibal Corpse with Cavern Swords from their second album, Vulture at Birth, which I think it has some of the most underrated songs in their discography. Again, this is another one of the simplest, dumbest riffs I could have chosen for this series because I just wanted something groovy and mean and that goes hard, because I just loved when Cannibal Corpse does riffs in 6/4. And of course in this decade it was very common for death metal bands to use solid state amps that sounded very fizzy, very scooped. Here you go. Like I said at the beginning of the video, this episode is sponsored by Sweetwater. They provided me with the Nano Cortex that I'm using for the tones in this video, and pretty much almost every other piece of equipment that I use to record these videos. like the microphone that I'm using, the lights, the camera, or the guitars that I use to play the riffs can be obtained through Sweetwater. So if you want to check the Nano Cortex or any other piece of equipment that I use to make my videos, you can check it on the link in the description down below to sweetwater.com. And like I said before, it's an affiliate link, so if you buy anything, and I mean anything, using that link, I do make a small commission, so you help support the channel. Once again, thank you so much to Sweetwater for sponsoring the video and for supporting me. Now back to the riffs. Now moving on to the 2000s, which I think was when people finally locked in on how to produce really heavy sounding metal productions. As much as I like the 90s, the 2000s I think was when people kind of figured it out. And once again, I had to add to another episode this band because they have just so many nasty riffs. Gojira with Ocean Planet. I already played this particular riff in a previous episode, but just the riff just goes so hard, man. I just had to put this one. Could have put something like The Heaviest Matter of the Universe or Toxic Garbage Island, whatever you want. Into the Wilderness, one of my favorite Gojira songs. Lately, Ocean Planet has just been really hitting hard for me. Now for the 2010s was an era where apparently a lot of people thought that it was a good idea to use less gain and then more mids, but just too much mids. So a lot of people ended up having very boring, very dry tones. The scenic passage. This was the decade where Gen was reigning supreme, and a lot of metalcore and deathcore bands were going for a more genty direction with their particular style of metal. So to represent this decade, I went with a good band, which is the Acacia Strain with the song Beast, which is from the year 2010, exactly. I do enjoy a lot more their more hardcore inspired, unhinged kind of deathcore, but this I still enjoy regardless. Check it out! Now moving on to the present decade of 2020, thankfully bands figure out that it was actually better to use more gain, and for the 2020s I chose a band that I think is a very good representation of the sound of this decade, Kublai Khan with Supreme Ruler. What I've been noticing is that a lot of metalcore and especially hardcore bands that have been doing really good in the last couple of years have been using, yes, tones that have a lot of mids, but do still have a lot of gains, and it's more like lower mids focus, so you get very chunky tones out of these bands. And I mean, Kublai Khan just has a plethora of mean riffs, so I think it was the perfect decision to include them for this decade. But that's it for this episode, gang. Let me know in the comments down below what do you think are the meanest riffs from each decade. Once again, thank you so much to Sweetwater for sponsoring this video. Check them out in the link in the description down below. If you would like to watch another video full of mean and nasty and disgusting riffs, you can watch it right here. All my social media links and my Discord server link will be in the description down below as always, so please go ahead and check it out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.